U.S. museums, universities, and federal agencies still hold 110,000 Native American remains. New study says no evidence Russian tweets affected outcome of 2016 U.S. election. Attorney General Garland appoints Hoare as counsel to investigate Biden. German government report highlights anti-Muslim racism. Indonesia's president regrets country's past rights violations. Indian government raises 500 Muslim houses in Assam. From Toronto studios, this is the Muslim News on Muslim Network TV. Assalamu alaikum, I'm Saamiyah Syed. Our top story tonight: a number of American museums, universities, and federal agencies have still not released the remains of more than 110,000 Native American, Native Hawaiian, and Alaskan Natives' ancestors' remains. A ProPublica report found that the government and military officials harvested the dead from battlefields and massacre sites. As well, throughout the 1800s, archaeologists and museum collectors looted Native American remains from ancient homes, graves, and places of worship. A federal law passed in 1990 called for the remains to be returned to descendants or tribal nations. However, America's largest have failed to do so. One example of this is the Smithsonian Institution. It currently holds in storage the remains of about 10,000 people, more than any other U.S. museum. A special counsel will investigate whether President Biden, as vice president, mishandled classified files, Attorney General Merrick Garland announces. Garland made the announcement Thursday after a second batch of classified documents was found in the garage of Biden's Wilmington, Delaware residence. Attorneys for Biden informed the department of an additional document located within the House today. Robert Hur, a Trump appointee, will conduct the investigation. Two Texans made history this week as they were sworn into office as the state's first Muslim and South Asian representatives. Salman Bojani, a convenience store cashier turned attorney and business owner from Euless, Texas, will represent the Arlington area in North Texas. Dr. Suleiman Lalani, who has been in private practice in the greater Houston area for the last 2 decades and in Sugar Land for 17 years, will represent Fort Bend County. Both Democratic representatives who are immigrants from Pakistan will join 148 other representatives in the Texas House. While most representatives took their oaths on the Bible, Representatives Bojani and Lalani each placed one of their hands on the Quran. Both said they hope to build a legacy through service to fellow Texans. Bojani said he hopes to focus on education, healthcare, and the economy, while Lalani says he plans to work to improve access to healthcare for all Texans. Michigan's Hamtramck City Council voted on Tuesday to approve allowing animal slaughter on residential property. This comes after several months of contentious debate. The all-Muslim City Council voted 3-2, with Mayor Amr Ghalib casting the tie-breaking vote to amend a city ordinance. Among cities in the United States, Hamtramck has one of the highest percentages of Muslim residents, and the vote affects them directly. Muslims often slaughter animals during Eid al-Adha, an annual holiday. As well, some members of Hamtramck's Jewish community also perform animal sacrifices during holidays at a halal butchery run by Muslims. Last year, the city became the first in U.S. history to have their entire elected city council be composed of Muslims. Kenneth Roth has accused Harvard University of blocking him from a 1-year human rights fellowship at the school due to his criticism of Israel's treatment of Palestinians. Roth is former executive director of Human Rights Watch, which has declared Israel to be an apartheid state based on its mistreatment of and discrimination against Palestinians. Writing in the Daily Guardian, Roth said that the Kennedy School's dean, Douglas Elmendorf, vetoed the fellowship offered to him because of the criticism. A spokesperson from the Kennedy School did not deny Roth's accusation. Roth called the decision donor-driven censorship and has asked Harvard to announce that it will not accept donations which will be used to censor academic work. Like Human Rights Watch, Amnesty International, and Israel human rights group B'Tselem of Israel have also called Israel an apartheid state. A new groundbreaking study says there is no evidence that Russian tweets had any meaningful effect on the outcome of the 2016 U.S. presidential election. The idea that the Russian government weaponized social media to push voters to elect Donald Trump has been widely accepted in the U.S. However, the research by New York University found that exposure to Russian disinformation accounts was heavily concentrated to 1% of users. These accounted for 70% of exposures. Writing in the journal Nature Communications, the scholars involved in the study also noted that exposure was concentrated among users who strongly identified as Republicans. As well, they said exposure to the Russian influence campaign was eclipsed by content from domestic news media and politicians. They concluded that they found no evidence of a meaningful relationship between exposure to the Russian foreign influence campaign and changes in attitudes, polarization, or voting behavior. Iran has sentenced to death a former senior official on charges of espionage for the British intelligence agency, the MI6. Mizan News reported on Wednesday that Ali Reza Akbari, a former deputy defense minister of Iran, is sentenced to death on the charges. Akbari served in the cabinet of former Iranian President Mohammad Khatami. In an interview with BBC, Akbari says he has confessed to the crimes he has not committed due to months of torture. Reacting to the announcement, Britain said on Wednesday and urged Iran to release Akbari, a dual national who also holds British citizenship. The German government report highlights anti-Muslim racism details soon, so stay tuned and we will be right back after this short break. Welcome back. A German government report on Wednesday highlighted the problem of anti-Muslim racism in the country. The survey found slightly more than 1/5 of Germans questioned have negative opinions toward Muslims. Muslims are, after Sinti and Roma, among those minorities to whom Germans have the most negative attitude, the report says. It also pointed to the fact that Muslims have been subjected to hate crimes and daily attacks. In 2021, over 700 Islamophobic crimes were recorded, as well as more than 50 attacks on Muslim institutions and representatives, according to the report. Reem Alabali Radovan, the state minister for migration, refugees, and integration, stressed that it was important to name and discuss anti-Muslim racism in the country. She added the issue of anti-Muslim racism has repeatedly come up during her talks with representatives of the German Muslim community. Germany has the second largest Muslim population in Western Europe after France. It is home to nearly 5 million Muslims, according to official figures. Indonesian President Joko Widodo on Wednesday offered a state-level public apology over gross human rights violations that have occurred in Indonesia. In a speech broadcasted online at the State Palace in the capital, Jakarta, he said, "With a clear, genuine mind and conscience, I, as a head of state, acknowledge that there were gross human rights violations that did happen in many events. And I strongly regret that these violations occurred," he added. "I have sympathy and empathy for the victims and their families." Widodo was referring to around 12 incidents between 1965 and 2003. These included anti-communist violence in the 1960s and the disappearance of student demonstrators in the late 1990s. Unconfirmed estimates claim at least 500,000 people were killed in the violence during the 1960s. American Muslim human rights group Justice for All expressed its dismay today at the Chinese government's use of a Muslim delegation's visit to hide its genocide of Uyghur Muslims. According to Chinese media, over 30 Islamic scholars from 14 countries visited the area. They include those from Saudi Arabia, Egypt, Syria, and Bosnia and Herzegovina. Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid, president of Justice for All, called on the Imams to meet with Uyghur Muslims outside of China who are free to tell the story of their loved ones who have suffered due to the Chinese government's mistreatment. He also asked them to consider a statement issued by 300 major Imams and Islamic scholars in the United States issued this week. It called on Muslims worldwide to show solidarity with Uyghur Muslims. On Tuesday, a court in Austria said there was no evidence to uphold the charge of terrorism against Farid Hafez. Hafez was a professor at the University of Salzburg and one of the founders of the Austrian Muslim Youth Association. He is also co-editor of the annual European Islamophobia Report. In November 2020, his home was raided by authorities and his assets frozen for 2 years. His apartment was one of around 60 homes of Muslim activists and academics targeted at the time in what Austria's interior minister called Operation Luxor. In an earlier interview with Muslim News, Hafez described the raid, saying that the police pointed guns at him and his family. The search warrant used by the police in the raid on his home also accused Hafez of supporting the toppling of Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. Hafez is now a professor at Williams College in the U.S. Israeli soldiers rounded up 15 Palestinians in overnight raids and demolished several structures in the occupied West Bank on Tuesday, the state news agency Wafa reported. In a related development, Israeli forces demolished 6 Palestinian structures in the West Bank, according to a local committee. In a statement, the Colonization and Wall Resistance Commission said 2 houses were brought down in Jericho and the town of Kafr al-Dik in Salfit City. 4 other structures were razed in Anata town northeast of Jerusalem. Israel widely uses the pretext of lack of construction permits to demolish Palestinian homes. On Wednesday, the Indian government began its drive to evict Bengali-speaking Muslims in the state of Assam. Times of India reports that the homes of 500 Muslim families have been bulldozed in Mowgli village. Those evicted say that they were unable to collect their belongings and that their crops had also been harmed. Authorities say 600 security officers, 43 excavators, and 25 tractors were deployed for the bulldozing operation. In December, the Indian American Muslim Council said about 1,000 Muslim families lost their homes to Assam's bulldozing campaign. It is the state's 3rd big eviction effort this month. This latest eviction came just days after the Indian Supreme Court temporarily stayed demolishing a mostly Muslim neighborhood of 50,000 in the state of Uttarakhand. In response to a question from Justice for All's Adam Carroll, UN Ambassador Mitsuko Shino of Japan reaffirmed Asian countries' commitment to addressing problems facing the Rohingya in Myanmar. She felt her country is uniquely positioned to negotiate within the region because of Japan's understanding of the cultural differences. Coming up after the break is our in-depth analysis segment, so stay tuned and we will be right back. Welcome back. In the year of 2020, the child tax credit improved the mental health of parents. To discuss this in detail, let's go to Imam Abdul Malik Mujahid. Over to you, Imam Mujahid.
Thank you, Saamiyah. Sometimes government does something and we always hear bad things about it. But here's something which scholars are praising. There was a tax credit given for child tax credit, and parents' mental health improves. Well, what else parents like other than money? We have a scholar, Professor Rita Hamad. She is a physician and the director of social policies for Health Equity Research Program at University of California, San Francisco. Welcome to Muslim Network TV.
Thanks for having me.
So tell us, what was so unique in 2021 child tax credit?
Yeah, so the policy that we were looking at was the child tax credit. And for those of you who haven't heard of it, it was a major income support program that was passed during the pandemic. Basically, Congress was concerned that there was a lot of economic hardship and that families were struggling. So they expanded an existing program, which is the child tax credit. So usually the child tax credit, you file your taxes. It's for middle income families usually, and it's up to $2,000 per child. But in 2021, they expanded this program. It was up to $3,600 per child. And instead of waiting until tax season to get your refund, people started to get the payments on a monthly basis from July to December of 2021. So it was about $300, up to $300 a month for each child. And Congress also expanded the eligibility so that you didn't have to be a higher earner to get it. You could even make no money. Even people who were unemployed were able to get the tax credit. And also the child tax credit, unlike a lot of other safety net policies in the US, is available even to immigrants as long as the child has a social security number. So, we were looking at how this tax credit affected parents' mental health. And we were using a large data set from the US Census called the Household Pulse Survey. And we found that compared to people who didn't have children, parents had a big improvement in their mental health after this policy was put into place, improvements in depressive symptoms and in anxiety symptoms. And these improvements were the largest for people with the lowest incomes, who were the ones who were newly eligible and getting the largest benefits.
Well, it's not very often that people can correlate a government program with the mental health of people. Is there any precedent of these type of research and studies before?
Yeah, actually, my team has done some of this kind of work before where we've been looking at the effects of the other major US poverty alleviation policy. That one is the Earned Income Tax Credit. Again, it's another program that you have to file taxes to be able to get the benefit. That program is only available for people who work, and that one is restricted to people who are citizens or permanent residents. And for that policy as well, my team and other people who have looked at that policy have seen that it improves mental health. In general, sometimes it can be hard to study these policies, but we were able to find a data set that asked about mental health and that covered this time period, so we were able to answer that research question.
Well, does it mean we can generalize more money the happier you are?
Yeah. You know, it's surprising that's not always the case. There have actually been studies of the lottery. So people who buy lottery tickets and, sometimes get millions of dollars. There have been studies that have looked at those people a little bit after they get the money and find that, maybe in the first weeks or months after getting the payment, their mental health improves. But then, even though they're still getting those payments, they go back to whatever their usual is. So there's something to be said for how we deliver money to people is important. Like maybe one big lump sum at one time is not as helpful. That's how our tax refunds usually work, is one lump sum. So this study is suggesting that if you give people the money more regularly, that's actually better for them. And a lot of times in the US, the money often has strings attached. Like for the Earned Income Tax Credit, you have to be working. For a lot of the nutrition programs in the US, like SNAP, which is also known as food stamps, you don't just get cash, you get money specifically for food. And so, if your family needs cash that month for housing and not as much for food, maybe it won't do as much for your mental health. So that's sort of, people often tell me, oh, the result of your study was very obvious. But in a lot of cases, we find that the policies aren't working as we would expect, or that they're not benefiting the people who we really want the funds to be going to, or that the policy is really hard to apply for to get the benefit. This is like a tax credit, so it is a little bit technically complicated. So in general, probably we could say getting money is good for mental health, but the details really matter when you're trying to design a big, complicated government policy.
Well, but the point which you are noting is that it is not the lump sum money, the large sum of money, but the consistent level of reliable income increase, which is helping in this situation. Is that correct?
Yeah, we think that's part of why we saw that mental health benefit. Some of the, previous work on the Earned Income Tax Credit, which again is just a once a year payment, Most of those studies find a positive mental health benefit, but some of them question that. And some of the thinking is maybe because it's too infrequent, it's not that helpful. So yeah, I mean, and in the US, we don't have many other like no strings attached cash payments like that come on such a regular basis. It's actually more common in other countries. Other high income countries tend to provide cash benefits for families with children with the understanding that this is an investment in the country's future, that children shouldn't be penalized for the families that they were born into, that everybody deserves some minimum amount. And so a lot of other countries do provide these more frequent monthly payments. It's just not something that we did in the US other than this temporary expansion of the child tax credit.
Which are those countries in the West where this idea is coming from that providing some funding on the regular basis could be helpful for citizens?
I don't have a list of them off the top of my head. I'm pretty sure that Canada offers that, or at least they did it for a more extended period of time. And a lot of the high income countries in Europe also do that.
I remember at least one presidential candidate in the last election cycle in early days committed $1,000 for every citizen. I don't
Hmm.
know how far he went. He didn't go very far, but
Yeah.
that idea has popped into our discourse. Do you think you will have opportunity to present your finding that a consistent level of income support helps parent? Do you think you will be able to get invited to congressional hearing on this topic?
If anybody invites me, I'd be happy to go. I think we'll see what happens with the current Congress. As you know, it's a split right now. The Republicans have control of the House, and the Democrats have control of the Senate. So they might not agree on a lot of kinds of policies. I like to say that the child tax credit should be a policy that policymakers could agree on because it supports family values. It's an investment in children. Again, policymakers argue about the details. There's some discussion that maybe the child tax credit reduces people's employment, like because you're getting money with no strings attached, maybe you're going to work a little bit less. There have been studies that have looked at that and saw that if the child tax credit does reduce employment, it's only by a little bit, and that should be weighed against the benefits, like the mental health benefits that we saw in our study. Other studies found that the child tax credit reduces food insecurity. So that's something that Congress will debate, and even if there's stalling on this issue by the federal government, state governments in the U.S. actually can also act on this. I live in California. California has something called the Young Child Tax Credit, or YCTC, and that's similar but not exactly the same as the child tax credit. It's the same idea, providing an extra boost for families with the youngest children. And so states can act even when the federal government cannot. So I think it's definitely a possibility in the future.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Rita Hamad, for your time. Truly appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me.
Back to you, Saamiyah.
Thank you so much. That's all from our Toronto studios tonight. Thank you for tuning in. You can find previous episodes and more on our YouTube or Facebook. For more content, keep watching Muslim Network TV or visit muslimnetwork.tv. Assalamu alaikum and good night.